Whack. Take a breath. Lock your doors. Light, tonight. We are plunging into the dark, hidden corners of the world where logic unravels, and survival is often just a matter of blind luck. We have several accounts to get through. Each of them is entirely real. Each of them will make you question how safe you truly are when the lights go out. Our first descent takes us back to 2017, into the sprawling, desolate stretch of rural Illinois. Imagine a small town where the population skews elderly. The nights are suffocating like Wyatt, and the isolation is heavy enough to crush you. I was in my early 20s, newly relocated, and desperately lonely. I knew exactly one person, a friend Dill called Clara. In an effort to help me plant some roots, Clara connected me with an older couple in their early 50s who desperately needed a dog sitter. It sounded innocent enough. Some easy cash. A chance to meet people. I arranged to tour their home. It was a sprawling, brick ranch straight out of the 1970s, rotting slightly at the edges, a forgotten relic swallowed by the surrounding woods. Now, I used to explore abandoned buildings for the thrill of it, so the decay didn't bother me. But the couple, they were a different story. When they spoke to me, they didn't look at my face. Instead, their eyes meticulously dragged up and down my body. They were calculating, sizing me up. The tour consisted of them silently opening doors, letting me stare into dim, dated rooms, and shutting them again. No words, just quiet observation. They ran a side hustle selling firearms out of their living room, which they claimed was the reason for the staggering number of security cameras. And I mean everywhere. The driveway, the kitchen, the office, the hallways. Everywhere you looked, a little glass I was staring back. It made my skin crawl, but I needed the money. Fast forward to the week of the job. I settled into their home office, working remotely, comforted only by the glowing grid of the security monitors. Out there in the pitch-black woods, I had eyes on everything. The dogs had a doggy door, free to roam the fenced yard backing up to the tree line. The first night was uneventful, but on the second night, around 10 o'clock, the driveway camera blinked out, a black square on the monitor. Rural Wi-Fi is notoriously bad, I reasoned. I wasn't going to panic. I got up to check the front door. As my hand hovered over the deadbolt, the silence shattered. The dogs scrambled off the floor, claws frantically skittering against the hardwood. They tore through the doggy door into the backyard, barking with a ferocity that made my blood run cold. I sprinted to the back door, peering into the inky blackness. They were at the fence line, losing their minds at a specific spot bordering the woods. I saw nothing, just shadows stacked upon shadows. I coaxed them inside with treats, my hands shaking, and dragged a heavy wooden chair squarely in front of the doggy door. Nothing was getting in. But the next morning, the house was dead silent. I called for the dogs. Night. I walked to the back door, and there they were, happily trotting around the yard. My stomach plummeted. I turned my head. The heavy chair I had wedged against the doggy door was sitting 5 feet away, neatly tucked into the corner of the room. Dogs do not move heavy wooden chairs across a room. I called Clara. She rushed over, and we tore the house apart, room by room. She tried to convince me I hadn't pushed the chair far enough. I wanted to believe her. I really did. Days bled into each other until the final night. I was working in the office when I glanced at the security monitors. Every single one of them. All for feeds offline. I texted the couple, offering to troubleshoot. Hours passed. Crickets. Midnight approached. I was in the living room, trying to drown out the oppressive silence with the television, when the dogs erupted again. They charged the doggy door. I bolted upright, my heart hammering against my ribs. I grabbed a kitchen knife and crept to the glass. The dogs had stopped barking and were just pacing the fence, I whisper yelled them inside. Thump. A heavy, sickening thud echoed from the other side of the house. The garage. I froze. Have you ever felt the air change when someone else enters a room? The absolute stillness breaking. The quiet hum of another living, breathing thing occupying your space. I felt it. I secured the dogs, slid the chair back over the flap, and took a photo of it. Proof. I crept down the hallway toward the garage door. I didn't want to play the victim in a horror movie, so I called out, "Who's there?" Silence. Heavy, suffocating silence. I backed into the living room, locked myself in, and gripped my knife. 20 agonizing minutes passed. Right. Then, my phone vibrated. A text from the wife, vacationing in Florida, where it was currently 2 in the morning. Hide. Don't worry about the cameras. You're safe. My breath hitched. I hadn't mentioned my safety. Another text immediately followed. Also, can you make sure I didn't leave the garage door open to the inside? I don't want anything getting in it. My gut screamed at me. I ignored her. I pretended to be asleep. 2 minutes later, hi. I know it's late, but please check on this for me. I'm worried. I stood up. Knife in hand. I approached the hallway. As I neared the door, a distinct shuffle echoed from the other side of the wall. Someone was in there. My phone lit up one last time. I see you're up. Can you please go and uncheck? They were watching me. The hallway cameras were on. My hand trembled as I unlocked the door, pushing it open while staying as far back as physically possible. The door to the garage was wide open. It was a cavern of absolute blackness. I took the hesitant steps forward. A notification lit up my phone's screen, casting a weak, pale glow into the garage. Right there, pressed flat against the wall beside the door, was the silhouette of a man's arm. I didn't think. I slammed the door, locked it, grabbed my keys, and threw myself out the front door. As I scrambled into my car, the garage door began to slowly mechanically rise. In the glare of my headlights, I saw him, a grown man in a dark jacket, crouched behind a box, waiting right where I would have walked. I slammed the car into reverse and tore out of the driveway, straight to the police. They cleared the house. Found nothing. I sat on the couch until 4. Clutching the knife. Then, my phone buzzed. Hi. Plans changed. We'll be home soon. You can go home now. No mention of the police. No concern for the intruder. I grabbed my bags and fled. As I reached a stop sign a quarter mile down the road, I checked my rearview mirror. A car, completely blacked out with no headlights, slowly pulled into their driveway. I texted the wife, "Someone just pulled into your driveway." Her reply came in seconds. "I know." They were never in Florida. They had been in the woods the entire time. They turned off the cameras to mask their approach, stalking the perimeter while I sat inside, completely oblivious. I was being hunted. Sometimes, the terror isn't a hunter in the woods. Sometimes, it's right out in the open, hiding in plain sight. I bartended at a high-volume spot just outside Baltimore. It's a chaotic, noisy, standing room-only kind of joint. You order at the bar, you grab your food, you mingle. The music is loud, the lights are low, and the energy is relentless. It's perfect for me. On this particular weekend night, the place was packed with a rowdy college crowd. Tequila shots, spilled drinks, screaming over the bass. Through the chaos, I noticed an elderly couple walking inside into a corner booth. They looked incredibly out of place. It's a young crowd, and they had to be in their late 70s. I made a mental note and kept pouring. About an hour later, the rush died down for a fraction of a second, and my eyes drifted back to the corner. Like, they hadn't moved. They weren't eating. They weren't drinking. They weren't even looking at each other. Both of them were sitting rigidly upright, staring blankly at the brick wall beside their table. It was unnerving. When I finally caught a breath, I wiped my hands and walked over, putting on my best customer service smile. "Hi there. Can I get you folks anything to eat or drink?" The woman didn't blink. She didn't flinch. She just kept staring at the wall. The man, however, slowly rotated his head toward me. The movement was painfully slow, almost mechanical. As his face caught the dim bar light, a wave of pure ice washed over my chest. His skin was impossibly pale, draped in deep, unnatural wrinkles. But his eyes, they were sunken so far into his skull, they looked like empty cavities. He stared right through me and gave a single, firm shake of his head. No words, just a silent, dead-eyed refusal. My stomach twisted into a heavy knot. I stammered an apology and practically jogged back to the safety of the bar. I avoided looking at that corner for the rest of the hour. But human curiosity is a curse. Eventually, I risked a glance. They were both staring directly at me. Through the sea of dancing, screaming college kids, these two statues had their heads swiveled completely in my direction. Their hollow eyes locked onto mine. I locked eyes with the woman. She didn't look away. There was no life in her gaze, just a cold, crushing weight. I broke the contact, suddenly feeling dizzy. When I looked back seconds later, the booth was empty. At the end of the night, while closing up, I asked my co-worker Karen, a veteran bartender who remembers every single face that walks through the door, if she thought that old couple was creepy. She stopped wiping the counter and looked at me sideways. "What old couple?" "The ones in the corner booth." "What? The ones who didn't order anything?" Karen shook her head, listing off a dozen specific customers from the night. She never saw them. She joked that I was hallucinating. I laughed, but inside, my reality was fracturing. As we walked out to our cars in the desolate parking lot, I was already questioning my sanity. I fumbled for my keys. Out of the corner of my eye, I saw movement. Across the street, standing directly under the sickly yellow cone of a solitary street lamp, were two dark figures. Light. The man and the woman, staring. I couldn't scream. My throat closed up. I threw myself into my car, locked the doors, and peeled out of the lot. I never saw them again. I don't know what they were, but I know they weren't human. Like, there is a specific kind of madness that lives in the deep woods. A kind of isolation that makes you realize how insignificant you are. My best friend's father was a tree saw operator in the remote forests of the Pacific Northwest. He and his partner, Griffin, would spend weeks at a time completely cut off from civilization, leveling timber. They were assigned a new plot high up on a mountain. It took the company 3 weeks just to cut a dirt road wide enough for their trucks. They were completely, utterly alone. 10 days into the job, the radio static began. At first, it was just fragmented murmurs bleeding through the comms. They switched channels. The murmurs followed. For anyone who knows radio communication, that is mathematically near impossible. Something was tracking their frequency. As they pushed deeper up the mountain, the voices became clearer. A casual, disjointed conversation between two men. The words entirely unintelligible, but the tone chillingly conversational. Then, the physical signs appeared. A boot print in the mud. A crushed container. A makeshift fire pit. In a place where no human had set foot in decades. One afternoon, Griffin found a tent hidden in thick brush off an animal trail. They approached with caution and unzipped the flap. Inside was a single sleeping bag, a duffel bag, rolls of duct tape, coils of heavy rope, and a collection of hand-drawn, violently disturbing sketches of children. Scattered among the horrors were photos. And sitting on a rock nearby was a fresh, half-eaten apple. The owner was close. Griffin wanted to run, but my friend's dad, stubborn to a fault, insisted they finish the contract. They retreated to their camper and locked the doors. That night, the radio crackled. The voices were crystal clear. Two men discussing gathering firewood and fetching water. They were right outside. My friend's dad snapped. He grabbed the radio handset, mashed the button, and screamed into it, demanding to know who they were. The radio cut to deafening silence. The next night, around midnight, Griffin shook him awake. Gah! Crunch. Footsteps on the gravel outside the camper. My friend's dad reached for his firearm, only to realize his ammunition box was missing. They were unarmed, hundreds of miles from police, trapped in a metal box. The door handle jiggled. The camper sat high off the ground. Someone had to be stretching just to reach it. Then came the scratching. Slow, deliberate, agonizingly long fingernails dragging down the metal siding of the door. It went on for 4 tortuous minutes. Finally, my friend's dad couldn't take it. He gripped a heavy flashlight, crept to the door, and prepared to throw it open. But the door burst inward first. A blade flashed in the moonlight, slashing directly across his face. Blinding pain exploded behind his eyes. He collapsed backward, tumbling out of the camper and hitting the gravel. A heavy body pinned him down, the cold steel of a hunting knife pressing hard against his throat. A second pair of boots stepped into his vision, kicking him viciously in the skull. Griffin launched himself out of the camper, blindly tackling the man with the knife. The second man vanished into the tree line. The man Griffin tackled scrambled up and vanished after him. They drove 2 hours down the treacherous mountain road to the nearest hospital. The blade had sliced cleanly across his eyes, leaving him permanently visually impaired. 2 weeks later, the rest of the logging crew arrived to finish the site. In a drainage ditch, near the road, they found one of their co-workers, bound with duct tape. No arrests were ever made. My friend's dad still doesn't sleep through the night. Water has a way of hiding things. It swallows secrets and sound alike. I was 20 years old, hanging out with my friend James at his family's massive, secluded lake house. It was late. The lake was a sheet of black glass, and the sprawling mansions dotting the opposite shoreline were entirely dark. Vacation homes, sitting empty for 9 months out of the year. We were sitting on the dock, beers in hand, when a light caught my eye from across the water. It was coming from the second floor of a decaying, massive estate. Flash, flash, flash. 3 short, 3 long, 3 short. We stared at it, the alcohol buzzing in our veins. It could have been a joke. But what if someone was bleeding out? What if someone was trapped? We were dumb kids. We didn't call the police. We dragged the kayak into the freezing water and started paddling. As we drifted closer to the property, the silence became oppressive. The house was a looming silhouette against the night sky. The dock was half submerged, rotting away into the murky water. We beached the kayak silently on the rocky shore. The flashing light had stopped entirely. James wanted to turn back. I told him we'd come this far. We crept around the perimeter and found an unlocked window. We hoisted ourselves up and slipped inside. The house was completely gutted. Not just abandoned, but stripped to the studs. No furniture, no trash, no dust outlines. It was a sterile, echoing tomb. We found the staircase and crept up to the second floor, navigating by moonlight. We moved down the hallway toward the room where the light had originated. I pressed my hand flat against the wood, pushed the door open, and stepped inside. It was empty, except for one object sitting squarely in front of the window. An old, mechanical projector, pointed at the glass. Mike, my heart stalled in my chest. No one was hurt. No one was bleeding. It was a snare. James realized it a second before I did. He spun on his heels and bolted down the hallway, all attempts at stealth abandoned. I was right behind him. As we hit the top of the stairs, I heard the sharp click of a closet door opening from inside the room we had just left. Then came the footsteps. Heavy, frantic, thumping boots pounding against the hardwood, charging toward us. We threw ourselves down the stairs, careening blindly through the dark house. James dove head first through the open window. I scrambled after him, the sound of the boots cascading down the staircase right behind my neck. I hit the grass and sprinted for the water. James was already at the shoreline, screaming. The kayak was gone. I spun around. Sprinting around the side of the house, bathed in the pale moonlight, was a massive figure. A man, charging us with terrifying speed. I ripped open my switchblade, preparing for the end. But James didn't fight. He turned and threw himself into the freezing, black water of the lake. I plunged in after him. The cold was a physical blow, driving the air from my lungs. We swam like animals, our muscles burning, expecting to feel a hand grab our ankles and pull us under at any moment. We made it back. We locked the doors. We called the cops. It took them an hour to arrive. They crossed the lake, searched the property, and returned with blank faces. No one was there. No projector. No wet footprints on the dock. The house was entirely, completely empty. Whoever lured us out there didn't leave a trace. And to this day, I lie awake wondering what they had planned for us if we hadn't run. We never really know who sleeps 20 feet away from us. I had just moved into a quiet, upscale neighborhood to escape a crept down the wooden stairs, the darkness swallowing me. At the bottom, a sliver of harsh, white light bled from a room deeper in the cellar. As I edged closer, a new sound cut through the fake party audio above. A mechanical, rhythmic grinding, like a heavy buzzsaw tearing through something dense. I peeked through the crack in the door. Standing there were three older, rugged men, none of them Damon. They wore heavy-duty, industrial coveralls, thick rubber gloves, and protective goggles. On their feet were heavy work boots. The shoes upstairs wore props. Light. The smell hit me. It was a suffocating, chemical wave of industrial bleach and copper. Every survival instinct in my body screamed at once. I backed away, terrified to breathe. Suddenly, the light spilling from the crack vanished. Someone had closed the door from the inside. I didn't breathe. I turned and sprinted silently up the stairs, out the front door, and vaulted my own fence, locking myself in my dark house. I crawled to my upstairs window and watched. 10 minutes later, the music died. I told her men poured out the front door, scanning the street with aggressive paranoia. White. One shoved another. Light. They were furious. Damon was nowhere to be seen. The next morning, the cars were gone. Damon's car was gone. Light. Months have passed. The grass is overgrown. Amazon packages rot on the porch. Damon never came back. None of my neighbors heard a thing that night. Whatever they were butchering in that basement under the cover of a fake party, they took Damon with them. Inheritance isn't always a gift. Sometimes, it's a curse passed down through blood. After my divorce, I had nothing left, so I moved into my late grandfather's farmhouse on 10 acres of isolated Alabama woods. It was creaky, drafty, and smelled of old wooden dust, but it was mine. The first week was peaceful. On the 7th night, the peace died. I was lying in bed at midnight when the sound drifted through the cracked window. Wait. It wasn't a melody. It was a slow, broken, off-key tune, casually drifting from the tree line. It sounded like a man taking a leisurely midnight stroll through my backyard. I grabbed a flashlight and swept the yard. Night. Night. The next night, it returned. Exactly at 1. 19 a.m. Light. Closer. It became a ritual. Every night, the whistler stepped closer to the house. I called the local sheriff. An old deputy arrived, looked at the tree line, and sighed. Your granddaddy used to call us about the exact same thing, the deputy said softly. Said someone was whistling around the property late at night. Every spring. We never caught anyone. My blood ran cold. I dug through the attic and found my grandfather's journals. Page after page, year after year, he documented the whistling. He wrote about sitting by the front door with a rifle, waiting for the watcher in the woods. I started doing the same. I bought a shotgun. I locked every deadbolt. On a Tuesday night at 1:19 a.m., the whistling began again. But this time, it wasn't outside. It was echoing from the hallway, 10 feet from my bedroom door. I froze. The tune was slow, mocking, echoing off the hardwood floors. Someone was inside my house. I racked the shotgun, the metallic clack deafening in the silence, and screamed, "Who's there?" The whistling stopped instantly. I threw on the hallway lights. Empty. 2 days of absolute, agonizing silence followed. I thought I had scared them off. But on the third night, I was awoken at 0 a.m. Night. Not by whistling, but by knocking. 3 slow, heavy knocks, coming from the inside of my back door. Then, the floorboards in the hallway groaned beneath the weight of a heavy footstep. The lights clicked off. I stepped into the hallway, raising the heavy barrel of the shotgun into the pitch black. At the far end of the hall, barely illuminated by the moonlight filtering through the blinds, a figure stood entirely still, dressed in jet black. Their face was a pale, glowing smear in the darkness. They weren't moving. They were just watching me. My hands shook violently. Don't move, I screamed, my voice cracking. The figure slowly raised a leg, pivoting with a terrifying fluidity. I screamed again. Light, heavy, frantic boots slammed against the wood, tearing out the front door. I ran onto the porch and fired a blast into the dark woods, the roar of the gun tearing my eardrums. The next morning, the police found the front door unlocked. There were no signs of forced entry. Whoever had been stalking my grandfather for decades had a keys. And cell vibrated. I checked the screen. Unknown caller. I had 0 bars. The call shouldn't have been coming through. I answered. Just the hiss of deep, empty static. I hung up. I moved to the sewing room. Pinned to a corkboard were dozens of obituaries, meticulously cut from local papers. No context. Just dead faces. In the master bedroom, an ancient, yellowed rotary phone sat on the nightstand. The cord vanished into a jack, but had been dead for a decade. Myself vibrated again. Unknown color. I stepped into the hall and answered. This time, no static. Just a dry, papery whisper breathing directly into my ear. Don't answer the phone in the bedroom. The line clicked dead. The hair on my arm stood straight up. I checked the house. I was completely alone. I tried to call my boss. Call failed. Then, an ungodly sound echoed through the dusty house. Aha, a ring. The mechanical, shrill scream of a heavy bell. It was coming from the master bedroom. The disconnected rotary phone. I walked toward the doorway, paralyzed by dread. The phone was vibrating on the nightstand, physically shaking with the force of the rings. A ring. I backed away. I wasn't going to touch it. I fled to the kitchen, needing to check the basement to complete the job before I bolted. I crept down the wooden stairs into the damp, rust-scented cellar. In the back corner sat a small desk. On it was a cordless phone covered in a thick layer of dust. White. Next to it was a yellowed ledger. I opened the book. The pages were filled with handwritten entries. White. Lena H. July 3rd. Rang once. Didn't answer. Carlin. September 12th. Picked up. Warned him. Dozens of names. Dozens of warnings. I dropped the book, ran up the stairs, and drove away so fast I nearly spun out on the dirt road. I refused to go back. Mike. My boss sent another guy, Mark, to finish the job 2 days later. He texted me that afternoon, panicked, saying the disconnected phone in the bedroom kept ringing. Mark quit the next morning. He never told anyone what he saw when he finally picked up the receiver. Childhood is supposed to be safe. You believe your parents can protect you from anything, but they can't protect you from things they refuse to see. I was 10 when we moved into a beautiful, older home surrounded by massive oak trees. My room was on the second floor, with 2 large windows overlooking the dark backyard. The first night, I woke up to a sound in my closet. A soft, rhythmic shuffling, like dry hands brushing against fabric. I stared into the dark. Slowly, agonizingly, the closet door trembled and pushed outward, opening just an inch. I lay frozen until dawn. The next night, the tapping started. Tap, 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 coming from the second-story window. There were no branches near the glass. I pulled the blankets to my chin, terrified. Bite. Finally, I gathered the courage to peek. Pressed flat against the outside of the glass, 20 feet in the air, was a pale, gray, human hand. It didn't move. It just lingered there, pressing hard enough to leave a smudge of condensation, before slowly sliding down into the darkness. My parents laughed at me. They called it a nightmare. A month later, my 3-year-old brother started talking about the white lady. He said she sat on his bed. My parents brushed it off as an imaginary friend, until the night I heard him screaming bloody murder. I ran to his room. He was sobbing uncontrollably, pointing at the empty corner, crying that the white lady was staring at him with eyes made of black holes. The dreams started shortly after. I would wake up and she would be standing in the corner of my room, whispering my name in a voice that sounded like crushed leaves. Her head grazed the ceiling. Her skin was the color of chalk. The climax came during a violent thunderstorm. I woke up to the agonizing grunt of wood. My locked bedroom window was sliding open on its own. The brass lock turned visibly in the darkness. Rain whipped into the room as the window slid up, and she came through. She didn't climb. She floated. Her bare, gray feet hovered inches above the carpet. She drifted across the room, leaning her impossibly long, twisted neck down until her face was inches from mine. The cold, coming off her was like an open freezer door. I stared into her eyes. Just endless, empty black voids. She opened her mouth, a cavern of darkness, and whispered my name. I unleashed a guttural scream. The world went entirely black. When I blinked, the overhead lights were on. My parents were shaking me. The window was locked shut. The room was empty. They told me it was a night terror. They put me in therapy. We lived there for 3 more years. I spent every single night of my childhood terrified of the dark. Because I know the difference between a dream and a cold breath against your cheek. For our final story, we travel into the brutal cold of a mountain winter. It was December. I drove up treacherous, icy mountain roads to visit an old childhood friend, Scott. He had inherited his grandparents' sprawling, isolated cabin, surrounded by nothing but snow and silence. When I arrived, Scott was white, wrong. He was hollow. He spoke too slowly, staring through me, pausing mid-sentence as if listening to a frequency I couldn't hear her. The cabin was sparsely furnished. I was to sleep on a pull-out couch in the living room. Directly across from the couch was a long, narrow hallway leading to two empty guest rooms. The hallway was shrouded in absolute darkness. It felt like a black throat, just waiting to swallow the house. The first night, around 2 a.m., I woke to violent thudding upstairs. Someone was sprinting frantically across the floorboards directly above my head. Back and forth. Heavy, desperate running. Then, dead silence. The next day, Scott was a zombie. He barely ate. But 5 times throughout the day, I caught him walking down that dark hallway, standing in the gloom, and just staring into the empty guest room. That night, a blizzard hit. The wind howled, rattling the timber. At 2 a.m., I woke again. This time to a slow, agonizing scraping sound coming from the dark hallway. Like heavy furniture being dragged across the wood. Then, a sharp tap hit the wall directly behind my head. I didn't turn around. I squeezed my eyes, shut and prayed for dawn. On the third night, I couldn't take it anymore. I was lying on the couch, exhausted but terrified. Around 2 a.m., my eyes snapped open. My body was entirely paralyzed. Sleep paralysis. A suffocating weight pressed down on my chest. I couldn't twitch a muscle. Through the gloom, my eyes tracked to the end of the hallway. Standing in the absolute blackness was Scott. His head was down, his arms hanging limply at his sides. He was perfectly still, facing me, watching me suffer in my frozen state. He stood there for an agonizing minute. Then mechanically, he pivoted and walked into the pitch-black guest room. Slowly, the paralysis broke. Pins and needles flooded my limbs. I gasped for air. Grabbing a flashlight, demanding answers, I stomped down the hallway and pushed the guest room door wide open. Standing in the corner, facing the frost-covered window, was a silhouette. I backed away and ran upstairs. I burst into the master bedroom. Scott was fast asleep in his bed. I violently shook him awake. He groaned, confused. I screamed that someone was downstairs in the guest room. He refused to look at the door. He didn't say a word, but his face drained of color. He looked at me with an expression of pure, defeated terror. "Who is down there, Scott?" I demanded. He just slowly shrugged his shoulders. I grabbed my keys, abandoned my bags, and ran. The blizzard had broken. I threw myself into my car and slammed it into reverse. As I pulled out of the snowy driveway, my eyes were drawn up to the second-story window of that guest room. Standing there, watching me leave, was a tall, dark silhouette. I never saw Scott again. He eventually stopped answering texts. Whatever lived in that house claimed him entirely. 10 stories. 10 encounters with the edge of the abyss. Keep the lights on tonight. And if you hear a bump in the dark, don't assume it's just the house settling. Thank you for listening. Step into the dark with me, listeners. Lock your doors, draw the blinds, and let the outside world fade away into the shadows. Tonight, we are exploring the terrifying concept of absolute erasure. What does it actually mean to be wiped from the face of the earth? To have your identity, your memories, your name, and your very humanity stripped away, until there is absolutely nothing left but a cold, clinical string of letters in a dusty archive. We like to believe that if we meet a violent, tragic end, someone will look for us. We trust that the systems built to protect us will, at the very least, remember us. But systems fail. People slip through the cracks. And sometimes, it takes decades before someone bothers to look down into the dark and pull them back out. Our journey tonight begins not in a bloody crime scene, but in the quiet, sterile glow of a computer screen. The year is 2014. Christina Skates, a 23-year-old biology student attending Cleveland State University, was sitting alone on a mundane afternoon. She was a woman with a highly methodical mind, someone who possessed a deep, almost obsessive passion for genealogy. Christina spent her free hours plunging into the depths of family histories, untangling the complicated webs of ancestry, and digging through digital archives. She was brilliant at it. She utilized complex cross-referencing, deep database mining, and advanced DNA tracing techniques that would make seasoned, veteran investigators pause and take notes. She possessed a natural, insatiable hunger for putting broken puzzles back together. On this particular afternoon, she was idly scrolling through digital cemetery records, just killing time. Line after line of names, dates, and final resting places flickered across her monitor. And then, her eyes hit line 82,483. The scrolling stopped. The room around her seemed to grow uncomfortably quiet. The entry listed a date of death, February 5th, 1975. But where a name should have been, where the identity of a human being should have been permanently etched into the historical record, there was only a chilling, 5-word description. Unknown white female bones. Christina sat frozen, staring at those words. A sudden, heavy weight settled in her chest. This wasn't just a typo. This was a human being. A woman who had been murdered, tossed away, and buried without a name, completely and utterly abandoned by society. For months, after that day, the phrase echoed in Christina's mind. It was a persistent, nagging whisper in the back of her head, constantly reminding her that something was fundamentally, horribly wrong. But what made this specific ledger entry feel like a personal haunting was the geography. This nameless victim wasn't found in some far-off, distant state. The remains had been discovered in Strongsville, Ohio, a mere 20-minute drive from where Christina herself had grown up. This was her home turf. This was a nightmare buried in her own backyard. To truly comprehend how a brutal murder was reduced to a mere footnote in a cemetery log, we have to travel back in time. We must rewind the clock to the bitter, freezing winter of 1975. It was February 15th. The Ohio air was violently cold, the kind of chill that bites through your coat and settles deep into your joints. 3 teenage boys were wandering through the desolate, frost-bitten woods along the rocky river inside the Mill Stream Run reservation. The trees were bare, the ground was hard, and the landscape was silent. As they kicked through the winter debris, one of the boys spotted something unnatural resting in the freezing mud. They approached cautiously, the breath plummeting from their mouths in the frigid air. Scattered across the freezing earth were skeletal remains. They were unmistakably human. Panic set in, whether they were terrified of the police or just paralyzed by the horrific reality of what they had stumbled upon. It took the teenagers a little while to finally report the grim discovery to the authorities. When the police finally arrived and began excavating the frozen ground, the nightmare only deepened. The remains had been brutally ravaged by the elements. Months of harsh, weather and aggressive animal scavenging had scattered the bones across the desolate woodland. Crucial pieces of the skeleton were completely missing. The lower jawbone, the mandible, was gone. Almost all of the teeth had been lost to the dirt, leaving only 5 intact, along with 1 wisdom tooth that had never erupted. But the skull remained, and the skull told a terrifying, violent story. Embedded deep inside the left temple was a single, .25 caliber bullet. This wasn't an accident. This wasn't exposure. This was an execution. 3 days later, on February 12th, the coroner officially ruled the death a homicide. The medical examiners estimated the victim to be a young woman, roughly 20 years old. But without the rest of the remains, it was little more than an educated guess. Investigators knew they were looking at a young, white female who had been shot in the head and discarded like trash in the freezing woods. But who was she? The detectives in 1975 utilized every single tool available to them in that era, which, tragically, wasn't much tragically. They were so desperate for a lead that they even pulled photographs of Patty Hearst, who was dominating the national headlines at the time, hoping against hope that they had somehow stumbled onto the most famous missing person in the country. It was a massive, desperate reach, and of course, the dental records proved it was a dead end. They checked missing persons reports. Nothing fit. Wait. They waited for grieving parents to call the station. The phones remained silent. The investigation hit a brick wall at full speed. 3 months later, on May 15th, 1975, the system gave up. The fragmented bones of the young woman were packed away and transported to Memorial Garden Cemetery. She was buried in Potter's Field, a desolate, anonymous tract of land reserved for the unclaimed, the forgotten, and the unloved. There was no service. There were no tears. No family members stood by the grave to say goodbye. She was lowered into the earth beneath an unmarked stone, swallowed by the soil, and relegated to line 82,483 in a ledger book. Unknown white female bones. Decades bled away. Detectives grew old and retired. Evidence boxes were shipped into dark, climate-controlled storage rooms, gathering thick layers of dust. The murdered girl by the Rocky River was completely erased from the public consciousness. Until 2014, until a 23-year-old biology student refused to look away. Christina's academic training had hardwired her brain to ask questions, to relentlessly pull at loose threads until the fabric unraveled. Her friends jokingly called her an amateur detective, but her drive was entirely serious. She could not stomach the idea that a victim could be so thoroughly discarded. She began her crusade where any classic investigation starts, the archives. Christina spent grueling hours isolated in the quiet basements of local libraries. She hunched over glowing microfiche machines, the mechanical whir of the reels filling the silence as she scrolled through thousands of pages of decades-old newspapers. She was hunting for any scrap of ink, any forgotten headline from February 1975 that might hold a clue the police had missed. What she found was deeply disturbing. It wasn't that the information was wrong. It was that there was almost no information at all. A young woman had been shot in the head and dumped in a public reservation, and the local press had barely deemed it worthy of a passing mention. It was treated as just another nameless body. A chain though not worth the ink. Without media pressure, the public remained completely oblivious. No tips came in. No outrage was sparked. The press had failed her just as spectacularly as the justice system had met. Frustrated but undeterred, Christina pivoted to the authorities. She picked up the phone and began dialing. She called the Cleveland police. She called the Akron police. She called the Cuyahoga County Sheriff's Office. She slammed into bureaucratic walls at every turn. Some departments claimed they had absolutely no record of the incident. Others stated the files were incomplete. Most simply brushed her off, citing protocol, telling the persistent college student that cold case files were strictly confidential, and that formal requests would take months to process. Christina was confronting the infuriating reality of institutional red tape. She was learning firsthand how easily a cold case can remain frozen solid, guarded by a labyrinth of apathy and protocol designed to keep curious eyes out. But then, a crack formed in the wall. Christina managed to get a hold of Lieutenant Don Sylvius with the Cleveland Metro Prax Police. Expecting another dismissal, Christina launched into her pitch, explaining her intense interest in the Strongsville Jane Doe. Lieutenant Sylvius didn't hang up. He listened. He heard the genuine, desperate concern in Christina's voice. He recognized her as knowledge of genealogical research. Sylvius made a decision that broke protocol, a decision that would alter the course of history. He realized that this case was going nowhere sitting in a box. If this determined student had the digital savvy to shake the trees, why not give her the wind to do it? Sylvius handed Christina the keys to the kingdom. He provided her with copies of the original, highly restricted case files. Suddenly, Christina was holding the nightmare in her hands. The faded, horrifying crime scene photographs, the muddy skull resting in the winter debris, the close-up forensic shots of the bullet hole fracturing the temple, the meticulous, clinical investigative notes that hadn't seen the light of day in nearly 40 years. This was no longer just a puzzle. The violence was real. The victim was real. Christina pored over the documents, analyzing every pixel, every handwritten note. But she soon realized that one person, working alone in a bedroom, could only push the boulders so far up the hill. She needed an army. She needed the collective, terrifying power of the internet hive mind. She turned to a community that lived and breathed in the shadows of unsolved mysteries. Christina logged on to read it. She navigated to the massive, sprawling community known as Unresolved Mysteries, a digital gathering place for hundreds of thousands of individuals obsessed with cold cases. Under the username CallMeIce, she laid all her cards on the table. She uploaded the cemetery record. She shared the tragic details from Lieutenant Sylvius's files. She posted the harrowing crime scene photos. She outlined her theory that this young woman had been a victim of catastrophic systemic failure. The response was an absolute tidal wave. The community didn't just passively consume the story. They were fundamentally outraged. This wasn't just a murder mystery to them. It was a glaring, offensive example of institutional incompetence, jurisdictional chaos, horrific record-keeping, and the casual dismissal of a human life. It struck a nerve. Instantly, the digital army mobilized. Users deployed incredibly sophisticated research tactics. They cross-referenced the Strong's Will coordinates with missing persons databases from the entire decade of the 1970s. They executed deep-dive Boolean searches to scrape the internet for obscure newspaper clippings. They tore through military records, social security death indexes, and regional archives. The momentum couldn't be contained to a single platform. A user named Migmu carried Christina's explosive research over to web sleuths, a highly specialized firm crawling with retired law enforcement officers, ex-military investigators, and obsessive researchers who had a documented history of successfully identifying John and Jane Does. Christina had accidentally triggered a perfect, unstoppable storm. The collaboration between the platforms was a marvel of modern crowdsourcing. Tasks were aggressively divided. One faction hunted through digitized obituaries. Another built massive, complex family trees based on potential matches. They wielded a power that traditional police departments simply could not compete with. A detective might be juggling 30 active homicide cases at once, restricted by city limits and county lines. But the internet has no borders. Thousands of hyper-focused eyes were staring at one single, solitary mystery. While Christina watched her solitary crusade transform into a nationwide phenomenon, a 54-year-old retired CPA in California was quietly reading the forums. His name was Carl Koppelman. Carl was not your average internet sleuth. After retiring from the world of accounting, he had found a deeply unusual, yet profoundly impactful calling. Carl was a volunteer forensic artist. He possessed an incredible, self-taught mastery of digital modeling software and facial anatomy. He spent his days reading autopsy reports, studying skull measurements, and using FBI tissue depth data to literally rebuild the faces of the unidentified dead. He had already helped solve massive, high-profile cases, using his digital brush to breathe life back into the forgotten. When Carl clicked on Christina's post regarding the Strong's Will Jane Doe, his initial reaction was bleak. The crime scene photos were a forensic artist's worst nightmare. The skull was heavily degraded, caked in thick Ohio mud. The elements had worked the bone. But the most devastating obstacle was the missing mandible. The lower jaw dictates the entire structure of the lower face, the jawline, the chin, the shape of the cheeks. Furthermore, the absence of teeth meant there was no structural reference for how the lips would sit. And without a single strand of DNA to indicate hair color or texture, Carl was essentially staring at a blank, damaged canvas. For months, Carl looked at the terrifying images of the skull, paralyzed by the sheer impossibility of the task. He repeatedly told himself that the angles were wrong, that there was simply not enough anatomical data to generate anything resembling an accurate human face. But the story of the nameless girl in the unmarked grave gnawed at his conscience. The sheer injustice of her harassor wouldn't let him sleep. Finally, driven by the same stubborn refusal to quit that had sparked Christina's journey, Carl decided to force the issue. He booted up his sophisticated 3D modeling software. He analyzed every microscopic contour of the remaining bone. He cross-referenced the damaged skull with anatomical textbooks, painstakingly calculating the mathematical probabilities of the missing jaw's size and shape. He estimated the lip positioning based on the 5 remaining jagged teeth. To avoid leading potential witnesses astray, he gave his digital creation a neutral, unassuming brown hair color. It was a grueling, deeply emotional process of educated guesswork and artistic intuition. But when Carl finally stepped back and looked at his monitor, a miracle had occurred. Staring back at him was not a sterile, medical rendering of a skull. It was a young woman. She had soft features. She had kind, gentle eyes. It was a face that commanded empathy. For the first time in over 40 years, the girl from the Rocky River could look back at the world. The haunting image exploded across the true crime forums. Thousands of people shared the reconstruction, hoping the face would trigger a memory in a grieving relative. But the true breakthrough wouldn't come from a forum post. It would come from a completely unrelated, coincidental phone call. In 2016, Carl Koppelman was on the phone with the Cuyahoga County Medical Examiner's office, discussing an entirely different set of unidentified remains. During the casual conversation, Carl brought up his intense frustration with the Strong's-Will Jane Doe case, mentioning his facial reconstruction and the agonizing lack of leads. The official on the other end of the line went quiet. They pulled up their digital archives. "We don't have any record of a Strong's-Will Jane Doe in our system." Carl was stunned. This wasn't just a missing file. The Strong's-Will case had never been entered into NamUs, the National Missing and Unidentified Persons System. NamUs is the lifeblood of cold case investigations. It is the centralized, federal database that constantly cross-references the missing with the unidentified. It was the very safety net designed to catch victims like the Strong's-Will Doe. But because of a catastrophic, infuriating clerical error, likely a misspelled name or a jurisdictional miscommunication from the analog days of 1975, she had been completely omitted. She wasn't just forgotten by the public. She was invisible to the very technology built to identify her. This horrifying revelation exposed a systemic rot. If this case had slipped through, how many thousands of other bodies were rotting in potter's fields across the country, absent from the digital grid because of a typo? The error was swiftly corrected. The forensic data, the crime scene details, and Carl Koppelman's haunting facial reconstruction were finally uploaded into the NamUs database. The trap was set, and it didn't take long to spring. In December of 2016, Sergeant Jeff Smith of the Akron Police Department was sitting at his desk, running routine queries through the NamUs system. He clicked on a newly uploaded file, the Strong's-Will Jane Doe. His detective's intuition immediately flared. The estimated age, the geographic proximity to Akron, the time frame of the discovery. It all aligned perfectly with a dusty missing persons file he had reviewed from September of 1974. A 17-year-old girl who had vanished into thin air. Sergeant Smith pulled the physical file. He laid the 1974 photograph of the missing teenager next to his computer screen displaying Carl Koppelman's digital reconstruction. A chill ran down the detective's spine. Despite the impossible odds, despite the missing jawbone and the degraded skull, the resemblance was absolutely staggering. The soft features, the eyes, the proportions. When Carl Koppelman eventually saw the side-by-side comparison, his reaction was instantaneous. She looked like my drawing. The ghost finally had a name. Like Linda Marie Pagano. But a visual match is not a legal identification. To give Linda her name back officially, to rewrite the cemetery ledger, the investigators needed irrefutable, scientific proof. They needed DNA. And to get DNA, they had to wake the dead. In October of 2017, heavy machinery and solemn investigators descended upon Memorial Gardens Cemetery. The task was a nightmare. Potter's Field was a disorganized, chaotic patch of earth with abysmal record-keeping. Using highly advanced ground-penetrating radar from the University of Akron, they scanned the soil, hunting for anomalies that matched the 1975 burial logs. The incompetence of the past continued to haunt the present. Their first exhumation attempt was a failure. They pulled the wrong body from the earth, a brutal reminder of how casually the unidentified word is discarded. But they recalibrated. They dug again. And finally, they found her. The remains labeled unknown white female bones were carefully lifted from the cold Ohio dirt. Bone fragments were immediately shipped to the highly specialized University of North Texas DNA laboratory. Because the remains were so severely degraded, standard DNA extraction was impossible. Scientists had to rely on mitochondrial DNA testing, a complex process that sequences the genetic material passed exclusively down the maternal line. They extracted the ancient DNA and compared it against fresh cheek swabs taken from Linda Pagano's surviving siblings. While the scientists worked their magic in the sterile labs, investigators began to piece together the tragic narrative of Linda's life. Who was she before she became a mystery? Born on April 11, 1957, Linda was the youngest of 3 children. She was tiny, standing just 4 feet 10 inches tall and weighing barely 100 pounds, earning her the affectionate, if outdated, nickname Midge. She had bright blonde hair, piercing blue eyes, and an independent, fierce spirit that contradicted her small frame. She was a good kid. She worked a part-time job at the local law and town match, meticulously saving her paychecks to buy her absolute pride and joy, a gold Mustang. She stayed out of trouble, loved music, and dreamed of a life bigger than the city limits of Akron. But her home life was a powder keg waiting for a spark. Linda adored her mother, but she lived in constant, suffocating tension with her stepfather, Byron Claflin. Byron was a bartender with a notoriously short fuse and a heavy drinking habit. He ruled his household with an iron fist, and as Linda approached her 18th birthday, her natural desire for independence clashed violently with his need for absolute control. The fuse was finally lit on the last weekend of August, 1974. On August 31st, Linda was buzzing with excitement. She had scored tickets to see Crosby, Stills, Nash Young at the massive Cleveland Stadium. She piled into her prized gold Mustang, picked up her boyfriend Steve Wilson and a few friends, and drove into the city. The concert was legendary. 80,000 screaming fans. 3 hours of electric, life-altering music. Friends later recalled that Linda was glowing that night. She felt entirely on top of the world. The final song the band played that night was Ohio, Neil Young's Dark, morning anthem about the Kent State shootings that had happened just miles away. The bitter, sickening irony is impossible to ignore. As Linda sang along to a song about the tragic deaths of young people in Ohio, she had less than 12 hours to live before becoming an Ohio tragedy herself. The concert ended late, Traffic out of the stadium was a nightmare. By the time Linda dropped off her friends and drove back to Akron, the clock had pushed to 4. Like 0 a.m. It was September 1st. When she finally turned the key in the lock of her apartment, she wasn't greeted by silence. She was greeted by a predator. Byron Claflin was awake. He had been drinking heavily, pacing the floor, allowing his rage over Linda's late arrival to boil over into a drunken fury. The moment she stepped inside, the apartment erupted. The argument was explosive, terrifying, and final. In a blind rage, Byron screamed at the 17-year-old girl to get out. He threw her into the early morning darkness and told her to never, ever come back. Like, the heavy door slammed shut, and Linda Marie Pagano stepped into the void. She had no money. She had nowhere to go. There were no cell phones to ping, no digital footprint to track. Just a vulnerable teenager walking the dark streets of Akron. She was reported missing the very next day. But she was gone. Erased. For 44 years, her family suffered the unimaginable agony of the unknown. Her brother, Michael, had even called the police in 1975 when he read a tiny blurb about bones found by the Rocky River, begging them to check if it was his sister. The police casually dismissed him. They told him the details didn't match. They slammed the door on his closure. And Byron Claflin, the violently angry, drunken man who was the last person to ever see her alive, he remained the prime suspect in the eyes of the family. Mike. But without a body, without a crime scene, the police could do nothing. Byron took his secrets to the grave, dying in 1990 without ever facing a judge or a jury. Fast forward to June 29th, 2018. The wait was finally over. The results from the University of North Texas arrived. The mitochondrial DNA from the muddy bones was a definitive, scientific match to the Pagano family. Combined with the age, height, and Carl Koppelman's terrifyingly accurate sketch, the truth was undeniable. The remains found by the teenage boys in 1975 belonged to Linda Marie Pagano. Christina Skates was sitting at home, playing a video game, when the phone rang. When she heard the news, the years of obsessive searching, the sleepless nights, the frustration of hitting bureaucratic walls, it all crashed down on her at once. She choked back tears. A 23-year-old college student had achieved the impossible. On July 12, 2018, law enforcement held a massive press conference. They stood before the cameras and officially erased line 82,483 from the cemetery ledger. The Strongsville Jane Doe was dead. Linda Pagano was alive in memory. For her brother Michael, the revelation was a crushing wave of grief and overwhelming relief. "I thought I was in a dream," he told reporters, his voice trembling. "I thought I would die wondering." Michael made it a point to track down Christina Skates. He met the young woman face to face, looking into the eyes of the stranger whose relentless, stubborn curiosity had given him his sister back. It was a profound, silent acknowledgement that sometimes true justice requires the obsessive dedication of the people, not just a badge. In January of 2019, the fragmented bones were cremated bones. Linda Marie Pagano was finally laid to rest in Holy Cross Cemetery, buried right beside her mother. She was surrounded by the family that had never, ever stopped loving her. But this story does not end with handcuffs and a prison cell. When the identity was confirmed, the case was immediately upgraded to an active homicide investigation. But detectives inherited a nightmare. The evidence was 50 years old. The prime suspect, Byron Claflin, had been dead for nearly 30 years. Linda's boyfriend from that night, Steve Wilson, had completely vanished from all public records. Authorities didn't even know if he was still breathing. The brutal reality of cold cases set in. As Michael Pagano bitterly accepted, "We'll know in our hearts who did it, but we'll never be able to prove it." The killer, in all likelihood, escaped the vengeance of the law. Yet, The shockwaves of Linda's case triggered a massive, systemic reckoning. The infuriating clerical error that kept her out of NAMA's forced police departments across Ohio and the entire country to audit their forgotten files. Investigators discovered hundreds of John and Jane Does from the 70 seconds on 80 seconds who had never been digitized. The system was broken, and Christina Skates had shined a blinding spotlight on the cracks. Her meticulous, responsible use of the internet hive mind revolutionized how law enforcement views civilian investigators. Police departments realized that they didn't have to fight the digital army. They could weaponize it. The collective obsession of thousands of people on Reddit and web sleuths could process information at a speed that traditional detectives could only dream of. Christina never sought the spotlight. She didn't want a book deal or a television show. She only wanted to correct a profound wrong. She took a string of clinical, terrifying words, unknown white female bones, and she transformed them back into a human being. She gave back the blonde hair, the blue eyes, the love of rock and roll, and the gold Mustang. She gave back the humanity that the darkness had tried so desperately to steal. So the next time you are scrolling through the internet late at night, remember Linda. Remember that buried beneath the digital noise, there are real ghosts waiting in the dark, waiting for someone stubborn enough, brave enough, and obsessive enough to look down into the abyss and call them by their name. Thank you for listening tonight, you beautiful, intellectually minded freaks. Keep your doors locked. Keep your eyes open. Until next time, stay out of the woods.